Perfect. All right. So for this session, I sort of gave that preamble in the lobby room, but here is sort of more like what our agenda is going to look like. We kind of already went through the introductions, which if you're viewing this on a recording, I'm sorry, you kind of missed that. But then we're going to sort of go into like the overview, I guess, the study design, the IRB process, and then a summary of sort of what we talked about. So I guess in terms of introductions, people on the recording may have missed that, but an introduction to what this session is essentially getting to the heart of understanding like what your undergraduate research journal is actually doing. So a lot of the guiding principles and guiding questions on a research study on undergraduate research journals themselves revolve around these questions. I kind of made up a few of them here, but you could really ask whatever questions you're interested in. But I specifically went into like, what do you want your undergraduate research journal to do? How do you know that your undergraduate research journal is doing what you want it to do? And how do you know if what you're intending to impart onto students is what you're actually imparting onto them? So sort of before we get into the rest of it, I want to switch my screen to sort of the research paper that guided this session, which I'm so happy to actually have like the faculty advisors for it here, Dr. Santiago Viles and Dr. Bocreta. So this research paper that they sort of advised is a student-written research paper on the student-run research journal, Penn Science. And I will put a link to this research paper in the chat because in my opinion, I believe it's like groundbreaking in terms of like showing what a student-run undergraduate research journal is capable of and how, more importantly, how it functions. So I'd implore all of you to read this research paper, and those of you watching the recording, the title is right here, so please look it up. But essentially, it is like a text on how Penn Science works and sort of like what students gained from Penn Science. And I won't go into the entire paper because we might not have a whole lot of time, but I did want to ask Dr. Bocreta and Dr. Santiago Viles sort of what was like when students wrote this paper and when you sort of were advising them, what like went in to writing this paper? Like what inspired it? What did the students who wrote it want to know about Penn Science? Does that make sense?
Yes, sure, go ahead. I think this paper is really the culmination of an experience of about 10 years that the students have passed it on to each other, because remember, the student every year, the new generation comes. So they kept passing the information and the know-how to the coming generation into it. So it's a 10-year of experience where they went back at this time, which is in 2008 or 12, I forget when we wrote it. And they went back to the students who have been, involved with this magazine for about its creation first, the precursor that led to it. There are important precursors that led the student to engage in this path, and they went and just wanted really to go back to all the participants in the magazine and surveyed them, about what did it bring to them, why did they get involved in it, and that's what this paper was about, is really relating their experience and sharing it with others.
Yeah, it is important to remember that the genesis of Penn Science, this particular journal, student journal, was not very straightforward. And there were some special circumstances in this particular university that sort of were favorable. They sort of planted the seed for the possibility of something like a student-run research journal. Let me give you an example. The most important event was the anniversary of the ENIAC. The ENIAC, as you might have remembered, it was the first electronic numerical computer. And it was originally done at the University of Pennsylvania for the Department of the Army to calculate artillery tables. They just realized that the integral was just the area under the curve. So if they can divide the area in really tiny areas, they can sum them very, very, very fast and do the integration. So they allowed some group of really enthusiastic students who understood the importance of the computer age to go to the dean of engineering, who was a very smart and a very, very, very open person, and supportive, of course, in finding the resources for the students who have the idea of publishing a issue celebrating the 50th anniversary of the ENIAC. And that they did. And the issue appeared, it's part of the journal. Of course, it was called the 50th anniversary of ENIAC. After that, there was some resources already gained. There was some experience. There was some development of a group that can handle the event. They published their first true student journal where they report some of the research.
They call it Doing Science Tech.
Right. It was this group was in residence in a part of a building that it was the wing of a building. And it was called the Science and Technology Wing because we don't have any other wonderful title to give them. And the S-Twing was the one who really started the idea of publishing a research journal. And the first research journal was called Science Tech S-Twing, yeah. And
they would become Penn Science eventually, right?
That's right. It became Penn Science eventually.
Wonderful.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is really important for all of us to remember that the journal evolves, just like everything evolves. So it has changed focus, it has changed structure, it has changed content. But every time it has been a positive change, enriching the lives of the reader and enriching the lives of this community of students.
Yeah, yes.
A student-run device.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah, no, it's good. Good.
Yeah, and I think that is sort of the goal of every undergraduate research journal. And what I think is so impactful about this paper is that it actually goes into those exact things. For example, I mean, this figure is really just about like who is participating in the undergraduate research journal, but when we go towards the end, so a lot of the first bit of this paper is providing background on how the undergraduate research journal is run, which I think every paper like this should provide, since most undergraduate research journals are very different from each other. But what's I think is interesting later is that they have these sections about the impact of these different models that they want to assess. They have the impact that it has on students. Like they surveyed students in the journal, both students that just submitted pieces, as well as people that were, editors or board members on the journal. And they have an entire section on author experiences and various statistics that go into sort of what is impactful for students and how students see their work as valuable. And so I personally was very inspired by this paper to undergo my own research project, which is kind of like the inception of this sort of workshop, is that I believe that every undergraduate research journal in the NUCSJ and beyond has the potential to make a research paper like this. And I think research papers like this are sorely lacking. This paper was written and published in 2006, and to date, there hasn't been a single other paper written by undergraduate students. And so I think that there is like a niche that is just waiting to be filled here. And I hope that all of you who are in this session and who are maybe like watching the recording are as passionate about filling that niche as I am. So, oh, wrong one. Okay. So what I guess is, what's the rest of this presentation? I guess this is sort of what the research process of such a study would look like at a glance. First of all, you need to ask yourself, what question or questions do you want answered? As I said in this introduction slide, that could be, what do you want your undergraduate research journal to do? How do you know your undergraduate research journal is working? Blah, blah, blah. And that question can sort of be whatever you choose. As we'll sort of go into later, for me personally, I wanted to ask, how do students like the organization of I ran it on the Aggie Transcript, which was UC Davis's undergraduate research journal. But it was, like, how do UC Davis Aggie Transcript students like having a student editor-in-chief, and how do they feel about faculty involvement as undergraduate research nowadays leans more and more towards original research? So that was just an example question. You all can ask whatever research question you're interested in or whatever you'd like. In this paper, oh, whoops, didn't mean to open that. In this paper, they sort of asked more general questions like, how do you feel about, whether or not Penn Science is prestigious, or, whether you think it's an accomplishment to have your paper accepted into the journal. You can ask all kinds of questions. And if you're doing a survey, oftentimes the more the better. So so that's sort of what you want when you're sort of planning your research question. The next question is, who do you want to help answer your questions? And this mainly boils down to, do you just want to ask your executive board questions, which is, I believe, what the Penn Science students did. They asked their 18 board members. Or you could ask your executive members plus everyone that submits to your journal, which might be a little bit more difficult. Additionally, you could ask members that have already graduated, like alumni, if you want more of like a retroactive study. So for example, how did your time on your undergraduate research journal help you with your career that you're currently in? These are all sort of questions that I think are worth answering and worth considering in your study. Next is sort of the research design, which is really like a huge question that can't really be solved in just a 45-minute workshop, but it's generally like, how do you want to collect your data? The people at Penn Science collected it through a survey. In my own research study, I also collected it through a survey. But you could also do like individual interviews or some other form of data collection. And sort of almost last, before you actually launch your study, how will you like get approval for this study? This is usually, or not usually, this is always through the IRB, or the Institutional Review Board. And part of this workshop will sort of be what goes into the IRB process, what you need to include. So yeah, and then basically lastly, you will need a mentor to follow through with this research project, because some universities do not allow people without an advanced degree to sort of be on a project. But as you all can see on this paper, that doesn't stop you from being the first author on the paper. It just means, as you guys can see, Dr. Bocreta and Santiago Viles were last authors. They were faculty advisors. They were advisors on the research project. And these three students here, well, these three authors here are students. And that should ideally be the case for your project as well. So let's see, what do we have next? So what goes into the study design, and why you might pick a questionnaire over an interview. So first, I'm sure you all have heard similar things, whether it's in your classes or whether it's just intuitively understanding the differences between a questionnaire and an interview. But essentially, a questionnaire will always give you quantitative data, which means you can run statistical tests and generally make like very easy figures. Whereas if you want to do a study through an interview, you're finding qualitative data and will likely require coding. Now, coding is this process where you turn responses into something that you can actually run statistical tests on. So for example, if I am in an interview and I say, oh yeah, like my journal helped me do this, this, and this, coding would be essentially turning that into, like, for example, I responded positively. That could be a code for me saying, oh, this journal helped me in these manners. And you can do that in a variety of different codes. Lastly, like, a questionnaire is usually easier to run because it's very easy to just send that out to people. But an interview is arguably more interesting and informative if you're actually trying to improve your undergraduate research journal. You can also add more open-ended questions to your questionnaire, but depending on how big your sample is, it might be very difficult to parse through all of those samples. And, usually I think an interview would not be bad if you're doing just your journal staff. Like, for example, if you're only looking at like 18 people in your journal, it would probably be very feasible to conduct an interview and then sort of just gauge where students are at in terms of their life goals, what they're gaining from the journal, how they are, gaining specific aspects that they think are valuable, etc. So before I go into the IRB process, or like, steps required to get this theoretical study approved, I wanted to go into like the, I guess, like the methods to collect your data. So Qualtrics is essentially like the gold standard in terms of research, specifically because it's encrypted. And you'll see on the IRB forms that I'll show you as a part of this workshop that having your data encrypted is very important in actually getting your study exempt from the IRB. So all of you are university students, meaning that you get Qualtrics access for free. And I think that this is sort of how everyone should see Qualtrics. Unlike the IRB submission, Qualtrics is universal across different universities, whether you're logging in through UC Davis or Columbia. And you really, there are a lot of YouTube tutorials on how to make Qualtrics surveys, so I won't go super into that, but this is sort of what it looks like on our end. The questions are a little bit out of order because just for me personally, I had to like swap questions around. But here is like, one question that I was very interested in answering. Like, how would you feel if your research journal had a faculty member for an editor-in-chief? And Qualtrics is really cool because it gives you like a lot of statistics right off the bat, right here. And it also gives you a lot of really easy visualization techniques to see it. I won't go into all of them, but essentially you can just filter them through page options. But yes, like I said, if you want to run any research study, do it through Qualtrics so that you can actually get it approved by the IRB. So speaking of the IRB, I've mentioned it so much throughout this session. What is it, and why does it exist? So the IRB is essentially this review board that makes sure that you aren't making a study that is damaging to participants. You also, here, give me 1 second. You also want to make sure that your data is collected ethically and stored ethically, so private information is not getting out. So in any type of survey where you're just kind of doing what we're doing, your goal is to be exempt from the review process. And that essentially means that your study poses minimal to no threat to the participants. Usually IRB is an extensive process when you're working with blood samples or something that may cause like psychological damage to participants. But obviously the types of studies that we are going to be doing that kind of stuff does not apply. So I guess next I want to go into what does the IRB process actually look like? Because it sounds kind of scary, right? Like you're applying to be like officially reviewed by some board and your study is going to be scrutinized. So, I mean, really, it's not as stressful as it sounds. And I sort of hope to alleviate that by showing you all sort of my process, the process that I did. So first of all, everyone's IRB screen is going to look very different depending on what university you're doing it through. So for example, I have a couple of these opened up right now, but let's say that, first of all, how do you even get to the IRB's website? Essentially, all you do is you type in like your university's name and then IRB, and you'll find it. So for example, like UC Davis IRB, you can just search that in Google. And if you just go down to like this, like the Office of Research, that is sort of where you'll find info for your IRB. And, you'll see a lot of different links here. What you really want to do is just like go to something like this, right? A submission toolkit. And every university will have like a different page that looks like this, but every university will also have an on-call number somewhere here. So, they have their like the office address right here. And you can go, like, for example, if you're at UC Davis right now, you can go into this office and get like a human being to teach you how to do this. But for most universities, it's very simple. Like you go here to the submission toolkit and you want to click on either forms and templates or just go straight to the submission launcher. So UC Davis uses IRB.net, and we'll go into like what kinds of IRB websites other institutions use. But just as an example, UC Davis uses IRB.net. So all you really, like, I already have it open, but all you want to do is like go to IRB.net's link, which is somewhere here. Like essentially this website will tell you like how to register. It's very easy. I am already registered with IRB.net because for my undergrad, I did this project at UC Davis, but this is sort of what your site might look like. At Columbia, it looks a little bit different. It looks like this. Oh, session timed out. At Columbia, for example, it looks like this. I have no idea why Columbia decided it would be a good idea to call their IRB thing Rascal. Go figure. But anyway, I'll stick with the UC Davis one because it sort of shows a completed IRB project. So as you can see, the board decided to exempt my project for obvious reasons, as I said before. And if you click on this, you can see exactly what documents I had to submit to get exemption. So I'm just going to go like into the designer tab. So this is essentially what I had to submit, and I'm very sure that it is what you will all have to submit as well. Usually this stuff doesn't really vary too much. It's more so like how the forms look that might vary, but the information is virtually identical. So first of all, I had a consent form, which was simply just like, do you consent to have your your information stored on an encrypted database? Next, I had the protocol document and the initial review application are perhaps the most important ones and the most similar ones. And then obviously the questionnaire survey, that's literally just this Qualtrics form that was exported to a PDF. So yeah, but what actually goes into this, I think, okay, it's just going to download it, which is fine. Let's just go to this. So this is what I submitted. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So this is what I submitted. It asks you for like a title. I wanted to make something that sounded kind of snappy. So my title was, "Is it worth it? An assessment of benefits to students of participation in undergraduate research journals." And in general, your forms are going to see things like this, like describe your objective, describe the hypothesis, stuff like that. And this will sort of depend on what you want, what your study looks like, and what your hypothesis is. This portion, I mean, if you'd like, you can read it. It's pretty straightforward, and your IRB office will usually provide samples of previous submitted projects that were approved. So I wouldn't stress about it too much. But next, it asks for your background, like what are the prior like research studies that have been collected and what the current gaps are. And preliminary data. And then it'll go into things like enrollment numbers, provide a rationale for why you believe these students will be in it. And inclusion, exclusion criteria. And then for the majority of this document, everything was sort of like either simple, like a survey to check, or you just say it's not applicable. So like, none of the above, there are no recordings. And if there are recordings, like if you want to do an interview and you want to record those, you'll explain when the recordings are going to be destroyed, stuff like that. And then, these are just like this is just medical information. Like at this point, the form is essentially over. Like, you're explaining the risks, potential benefits, whether or not you want to share them, whether or not you, need to include other forms. It's all very straightforward. And like I said, you usually just put no or none of the above for the rest of it. But so that is the protocol document. The other one is just this initial review application, which is essentially just like the form that is going to be this wasn't even a document that I submitted. This was like in IRB net. It asks you like a questionnaire, and then that's your that's the application. So, I just filled out like my personal information, my principal advisor's information, stuff like that. Most of this stuff I just checked no for the boxes. And yeah, like overall, like I think the IRB process looks intimidating, but once you actually get down to it, it's very simple. But let's like look at a different example of what an IRB process might look like. So this is Colombia's Human Research Protection Office, an IRB. They have a nice little button right here that just says submit a protocol. So once you click that, you sort of go into this document, create a protocol. I haven't written any IRBs for Colombia, so it won't have any saved ones, but essentially it'll be the exact same information. Like I said, you add a title, it just asks a lot of very straightforward questions. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because I am going to go back to this. But yeah, that was like a very quick version of like the IRB process and what goes into it. Hopefully it wasn't too fast and you guys didn't gain anything from it. But if you have any questions, you can definitely go ahead and email me, and I included my email at the end of this. But we have about like 10 minutes left in the session, which I'd like to dedicate to talking to Dr. Santiago Viles and Dr. Bocreta. But this workshop is really just the first few steps of the research process. The rest of it, in terms of like writing the paper, what goes into like successfully making like a research questionnaire, that is hopefully going to be given to you through some mentorship, through like a faculty advisor, which I'm hoping Dr. Bocreta and Dr. Santiago Viles can sort of go into their experiences and how they went about doing it for Penn Science. But last but not least, before we go into that, I'm going to ask an exit ticket at the end of today to see if you're interested in further workshops. So if you are, please fill that out. And if not, fill that out too. So with that, I'd like to sort of turn it over to Dr. Santiago Viles and Dr. Bocreta and just sort of have a discussion in these last 10 minutes about like sort of how, like, describe to me certain like problems that you might anticipate students would have. What problems did students at Penn Science face while they were coming up with their questionnaire? Things like that. Does that make sense?
Indeed.
So I don't know where like you guys want to start, but let's just say we want to start off from like right when the survey was like distributed, right? And results are coming in and your two editors are saying like, whoa, what, how do we continue this next? What were some valuable strategies that you two use to sort of help students get like on the right path in the writing process, maybe?
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So most of the students, first, I'd like to mention that our journal, like everything else, have evolved as a function of time. And only a fraction of the initial number of pages it's devoted to original research, and the rest it's for literature search. Mostly because now we have all these global sort of problems that are of relevance to all sort of disciplines, and people would like to get educated along those lines. In terms of our interaction with the rest of the university and the IRSP, as you were mentioning, we were in the School of Engineering, and most of the guys in here were doing physical sciences, although some were doing social sciences and biological sciences and medicine. So those have to go through those exercises. But most of our students were able to really move to the final stage of preparing things for production without having to interact with the RGB difficulties. Krim.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was a really simple process. I think the truth is we asked them, Jorge and I asked them, this is the time for you to give the feedback about your experience. You know, any student, as you can see, this is 2006, is about 4 years after the first volume came out, the first issue came out. So it's like we targeted, you know, the student when they started in this magazine to the time they graduated. And that's where it became really interesting for them to go through the exercise. So the doing through the bureaucracy that you have just mentioned there, I don't think our students dealt with that. It was an easy process for us in terms of publishing, in terms of this paper. They worked a lot on it in terms as a group. It is a group. I mean, we have only 3 students who are here because they went and presented it to the IEEE. But this is really the product of many other students because they have so many meetings, you know, to go through the surveys, the analysis of the survey, the criticism. So it's the whole community of the writers, editors, you know, etc. in the magazines that did that. Fortunately, as Jorge said, we didn't have the bureaucracy to like get the okay from anyone because, you know, they trust the system here, kind of trust in the professors. If we're engaged with the students, then it should be okay. We know the rules and regulations that regulate, you know, papers, information, you know, borrowing ideas, etc., and citing and things. So that's something that they worked on, you know, to make sure that it's their work. And they debated. They met several meetings to develop this paper and put it the way it is. So,
yeah. And honestly, as I was listening to you two speak, I sort of realized that, like, perhaps the most important thing to sort of impart on people in the session is that I think quality mentorship is a massive aspect of whether or not this type of paper would be successful. Obviously, Dr. Santiago Viles and Dr. Bocreta were, you know, incredibly nurturing of the students in Penn Science. And I believe that, like, you know, most of the students at this conference and most student-run research journals have a faculty advisor, and that person would probably be a really great mentor to sort of work with and just tell them this idea that you have, like, hey, I've got a really interesting research question that I want to find out about the people in my undergraduate research journal. Like, can you help me, you know, think more about this, or like brainstorm how I can collect data here in this way. So yeah, I just got that message from Heather. I'm sure you all did too, that says we're gonna wrap up in like 5 minutes. But yeah, I guess if, you know, if there's one thing that I hope I can impart onto you, it's that, like, as long as you tell a professor that you're like interested and you're passionate about this research topic, and you're not afraid of like the IRB, if you're not worried about like submitting your study, I think that a lot of professors will be very receptive and very helpful in getting the goals that you want across. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, it's part of the diversity wave that it's permeating all academia. It's really important for at all level of advancement that you get engaged.
Agreed. So I'm going to stop the recording and maybe go into some questions that you all might have.